Welcome to Inhale, Exhale, Elevate. I am Autumn Shelton. Today's guest is Lauren Carpenter. Lauren is the co-founder of Embarc, a family of neighborhood shops serving diverse communities throughout the great state of California. Before embarking on this incredible journey in cannabis, Lauren was in government, regulatory, public, and community affairs. She spent a decade helping dozens of Fortune 500 companies build effective coalitions in California, learning a tremendous amount about creating win-wins between business, policymakers, and the public. Before co-founding Embarc, she was the Chief Strategy Officer for Sweet Flower and Director of Government Affairs for Western States at MedMen.
Welcome to Inhale, Exhale, Elevate podcast. I am Autumn Shelton. This is a podcast hosted from our Santa Barbara Coast family cannabis farm to help keep your feet on the ground and your head in the sky. Autumn Brands and our female founders have a message that goes beyond just flowers. Learn about how our two families created a booming cannabis company that is leading the industry towards cleaner and more sustainable cannabis production. We aspire to move beyond strictly cannabis to help plant medicine lose the stoner stigma as we talk about all things holistic health.
Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited for today.
This will be great.
So let's dive right in. Can you tell us about your journey getting into cannabis and what made you interested in pursuing it?
Yes, absolutely. Although it's meandering a bit. I am, as you can tell from my bio, I am a total nerd. And so I think for me, watching cannabis policy unfold was, fascinating and also really gave me the itch because my background, kind of oversimplifying it, my background is really in building a bridge, taking policy, which people never understand how policy is, how the sausage is made. Honestly, it's probably better sometimes that we don't understand that because it's gross, right? But, the people don't really understand the policymaking process. And I think policymakers so often make policy in a vacuum where they really don't understand the people or communities and the impacts, especially when it's something new and everybody's sort of guessing as they go, right? And so for me, really witnessing cannabis policy unfold, I just got this itch of like, oh, this is going to be, and I mean this in the most loving way possible, like this is going to be a total disaster, right? Because a lot of, the cannabis industry, the cannabis community had been hiding from policymakers and law enforcement and all of these parties for so long. And now, of course, it's those very parties that are going to be creating the policy. So my need to get into the mix, I'm like, oh, let's see if we can build these bridges, right? And so I think that's really the impetus for me in wanting to enter into cannabis. I think if you rewind to 2018, MedMen at the time was really that big name that was doing, opening in a lot of communities, opening in a lot of states, telling, not the story of cannabis, but certainly a story of cannabis on the news and in the mainstream media. And so that felt like an interesting jumping off point, just partially because of the scale in order to jump into cannabis and learn through a company that was, I think, trying to do so much, but also through that, I really started to work community by community and start to understand that cannabis policy and really just cannabis implementation was very community specific. So that's what brought me here. And I think also what's kept me here.
MedMen's interesting because I think, even though they've left, they really helped create the start of this. They really helped normalize this. And I loved there's a video they put out at one point that was really, I think, powerful. So I think no matter what, even though they are no longer, in this industry, I think they really helped create it and really put us in a really good place. And so I think they did a lot of really great things.
I think people, when you tell someone you worked at MedMen, everybody, like, their eyes light up. If they work in the industry, their eyes light up because they're like, oh, tell me all the stories, right? Like all the hot gossip, which I totally get, particularly given the headlines. But I think what MedMen did really well is they brought together a lot of people. I don't know that the rest of the industry totally understands or appreciates how many people, which was part of their downfall, their scale, but how many people they brought together that were really passionate about normalization. And so I'm fortunate to be part of, or to have at one point in time been part of a team that I think when you were working, shoulder to shoulder with my colleagues, we were all really passionate about pushing things forward. I think also as a business owner now in this space, I'm also really fortunate to have seen that be built from the inside, because I think, like a lot of first movers, there are so many lessons that we can take from that experience. And I think I've certainly applied a lot of those to what we do now. So I'm grateful for that experience, the good, the bad, the ugly. I think it brought a lot of incredible and really talented people into my life. It gave me a lot of perspective. To your point, they were the tip of the spear, I think, on a lot of things. And so you learn so much from that process and experience. And I think also, candidly, they were really a testament to the importance of understanding and respecting what's come before you, rather than trying to redefine it all and all at once.
But it was great to see someone come in and really try to, you didn't have to just be a medical collective. Like, you could be mainstream, you could be an Apple store, you could, unfortunately, financial decisions got in the way of it being a long-term plan for them, but
Yeah.
but they made way for that concept to be real and realized, and for the consumer to appreciate it. So I think they did a great job there.
Yeah.
But my next question is, how was Embarc born,
Okay.
leading into your business?
Yeah, great question. So after I left MedMen, I went to, at the time, a small retail startup called Sweet Flower. They had just acquired 4 licenses, but they hadn't, they were in the process of operationalizing them. So that was wild in the best way possible, right? Because I went from something at the time had been massive scale, and then I went into a startup where there were, I think, 3 employees. I might be being generous there. There may have been 2. And it was our job, the 3 or 4 of us, kind of coming together to figure out how to take, something that was aspirational, this license, and turn it into something operational. And so I think that it was that juxtaposition that really gave me the bug. I'm a very type A overachiever. That's probably so tight I squeak, which I'm not suggesting is a great thing. But I think coming out of both of those experiences, I had this real intrinsic feeling that I needed to build something on my own. I was inspired by helping someone else build their vision in building Sweet Flower. But I think when you're that close to the ground, you develop your own vision. I certainly developed my own vision sort of coming out of MedMen and then coming out of Sweet Flower. And so I think that's sort of how Embarc was born. I joke and call it my quarter life crisis. I had a quarter life crisis that I needed to just jump off a cliff and do something, to build something. It was a really wild time looking back to have done that. So what I did is, I left Sweet Flower. I moved back home to Northern California, which had always been home for me. And I turned to my husband and one of his best friends, and I just really used them as a sounding board for, hey, I have this vision. I've been working in cannabis retail now. I've done the licensing. I've done the work with local communities. Like, what if we tried to do this? Which really started as, I think, a pipe dream, and why I call it a quarter life crisis, but ultimately just started to become more and more real as I talked about it more and more. And so, I teamed up with a woman who had been my mentor for about 10 years before I transitioned into cannabis. I worked for a woman, she's amazing, in policy and government affairs work. And she had actually just won a license in her home community of South Lake Tahoe. And when I had quit and moved to LA to work in cannabis, she had said to me, I'm Hotel California and you can never leave. And then, of course, I left. So joke's on me. And she was right, because she calls me a couple years later and says, hey, I just won this license in South Lake Tahoe, which is my home community. I told you can never leave. Will you come help me? Right? Like, I'm tapping you in, kid. So I think the timing of that was right as I was talking with Dustin and Kevin about really wanting to build something on my own. And so it just, like, timing was everything. And we just came together, and that was the first Embarc.
At 25.
Yeah.
That's like, incredible. To be a coming entrepreneur so young.
Yeah,
I'm so impressed.
Young. In hindsight, I was pretty young. I think, the other it's funny though to say timing is everything, because it also meant that we were constructing with our collective life savings a store in the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, which, as you can recall, was sort of a roller coaster. So So I'm super fortunate to have had a quarter life crisis that resulted in me partnering with my mentor and ultimately launching Embarc. But it was super strange to be doing that as the world was shutting down.
Yeah. How did you get through that?
Great. Absolute insanity. I think, in some ways, I think
Cannabis.
Yes, so much cannabis. A blind belief. There's something when you jump off that cliff and you say, I'm going to take this risk. I just had to sort of cling to that belief in myself and belief in us. I wish there was like some better answer than that, but I think it was sort of just like radical self-belief that we could do this. I think if I had any perspective other than that, I would have crawled into the fetal position and probably not continued to do it. So you just have to believe in yourself. And I think ultimately, that was the beginning of building a team, a very small team, a very lean team, because again, we were actually paying them out of our checking account for a little while, which is frowned upon. So don't do that. But that's how startup.
That's how you survive.
It starts at your dining room table. And I think, that was this belief that we could build something a bit different is what really guided me. And then I think, alongside Christy, starting to build this small but ultimately mighty team that was willing to move to South Lake Tahoe in the middle of a global pandemic without their families and build a store and get that store open. I think the other secret sauce to that is really just team. We were 5 of us, but we were so committed to it every day. And there was something about COVID that, every day there wasn't weekends. There weren't nights versus working days. It was just all bled together. So I think we just literally worked 20 hours a day, 7 days a week to make it happen.
So fast forward today, how many dispensaries do you have?
So we're at 15 dispensaries open right now, and we have about 10 more that are in development.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible. So what is it about Embarc that sets you apart from the other cannabis retailers?
Well, I don't have a pithy answer to that. I think, the way that we approach opening new stores is really through, is a community by community by community exercise. So our growth is not through acquisition. It's through the merit-based licensing process, which, kind of going back to my background as a sort of policy nerd and community builder, that for me is what's really appealing about what we do. I feel like I should put on, war paint. That's when we're going to war, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But that's what I think that's a big part of what makes it feel so rewarding. And so for us, we go community by community. It is painstaking. It can take 2 to 3 years sometimes. And we really build a coalition. That's step one for us, is we go to all of the people that have historically been reticent about cannabis, opposed to cannabis, right? That just would typically be the ones in city council chambers saying, hell no cannabis, right? And we bring them together, and we, over dozens and dozens and dozens of coffee meetings over sometimes a year and a half, right? We work through a lot of those fears and concerns and preconceived notions that I think have been that barrier to an understanding around cannabis. And it's through that process we coalesce a community advisory board. It typically has school board members and pastors and parents and youth nonprofit leaders, all of the folks that people would typically think are going to be, radically opposed to cannabis. And we bring them together and we really say, help us shape our approach to this business and our approach to this community. And so I think that's because that's what we do beginning day one, it really builds community into our DNA, I think, in a really interesting way. I love that so many retailers do, food drives and clothing drives and all sorts of really important things that are community centric and are about giving back to their communities. And certainly we do those things too. But I think what we try and do is sort of take that a step further and really bringing those folks to the table from the very beginning to help shape, every aspect of our operations, not just sort of the social responsibility component. And so I think that really breeds a sense of community and a real connection to the community that changes the tone and tenor within our store.
And what about like the design? Do you have a consistent design across all the stores? What about the brands that you carry? How do you really?
I think, the design is ever evolving. I think I would be lying to you if I said we've totally cracked the case and figured it out. I think every community is super different. And so we've developed, we've been more successful in some communities than others around the design, but also we've continued to refine and experiment with the business model based on lessons learned from other stores and based on, kind of the vibe of that community. So some of our stores are bodega. So you basically walk in like you're going to your corner bodega and you pick up your shopping basket and you shop the store. And I think, I love that approach because it is so experiential for folks. I think it completely destigmatizes cannabis when you're able to just walk up to a shelf and compare, this gummy to this gummy, just like you would anything else in your grocery store. But I also think I love that because I love that format for brands. Brands put so much energy into their packaging and their storytelling. And so, it's a bummer when it's so removed from the consumer, right? And so I love that sort of shopping form factor because I think it puts the brands front and center, which is hugely important to us. We've developed other models. Not every community allows for that model. Some communities, because of their regulations, have sort of the traditional behind the counter model. But even within that model, we try and innovate so that there's more connectivity and more touch points between the consumer and that branded good so that, again, the brand can, with our help, but the brand can tell their own story. And then
I love that.
Yeah, I think, look, as a brand builder yourself,
I appreciate that. Yeah.
You put so much energy into all of that. And I think it's a bummer when you're just this sea of color behind a counter, and then I think in terms of the curation, we recognize that every community's preferences are a little different. Many communities, not every community, but many communities have some local brands. And so I think every store's selection has, some variability to reflect that community and its preferences. But as we scale, I've also really had to get schooled in supply chain. So I'm learning a lot about the fact that it's completely unmanageable to have 5,000 SKUs across a 15-store fleet because you have such wide variety in all of them. So do
you do central distribution or does each store still buy for itself?
We do central buying through our buyer, Ivy. I say this every time. Ivy is my boss when it comes to what's on our shelves. So everybody that's always coming to me, I'm like, oh, you got to talk to Ivy. But we do really solicit feedback from the leadership in each of the stores around what are the trends that you're seeing? What are those, to the extent there are local brands, what are those local brands, so that Ivy has helpful data on the ground that continues to shape her decision making. And obviously it's our goal, if we find a great local brand in Sacramento that's a wonderful partner, it's our goal that we help incubate them into success in the Sacramento store such that we can continue to, we can expand their presence to be across all 15 stores. So I think for us, we're taking a very partnerships centric approach to the brands on our shelves. I think most people would say retailers, unfortunately, because so many of them don't pay the bills, retailers hold a lot of the cards right now. But I fully believe that brands will hold the cards in the future. And so for us, I think it's important. We're really striving to break out of the sort of transactional nature of those relationships and really focus on, how can our marketing team and our events team, how can all this become sort of a wraparound where we're building a real partnership.
It's so important. I mean, I think, it's been such a journey since this started in 2018, and a lot of the dispensaries too, they didn't know how to buy. They would buy way too much and then they would be able to sell through. And So I think, a lot of them, smart ones, have learned to, buy enough for a week and then replenish, and then also find the brands that they can really work with, and that will be more of a long-term player, because we have had a lot short-term players come through. So I'm sure it's been, quite a journey for you too, to kind of understand who and when, and, you know,
How to build a
how it all fits
sustainable,
together.
yes, how
Yeah.
to build a sustainable relationship that not
Yes.
only sustains you as the retailer, but actually helps the brand remain sustainable too. How do you create,
Right.
predictable revenue sources for brands that they can demand plan around? Data.
And giving feedback to them.
Yeah,
Yeah, data.
data, feedback. Imagine we're coming a long way in a short amount of time, right? That we're starting to really try and introduce those concepts.
We're almost there.
Yeah.
Let's go back to you being an entrepreneur. Was there anyone that inspired or mentored you to really want that in your quarter life crisis?
Yes, I can hope that that was just my quarter life and I lived so long. I think, I've already talked about there are a few people. One of them is Christy. She's our partner in the South Lake Tahoe store. I was 21 years old, just started working in politics in Sacramento, started working at a firm that she was a partner at. And I just was hustling, right? Like, you're 21 years, you're just proving yourself. Like, you're the lowest, you're not even on the totem pole. You're looking up the totem pole in the firm, right? And I think I was so inspired by her as just this really strong force to be reckoned with in the firm she was in, which was very male dominated, in an industry that was very male dominated. And she just didn't care. I mean, she just pushed through everything and was the smartest person in the room, but very delicate about how that was. I just learned so much about how to navigate politics and policy. And I don't just mean in the Capitol, I sort of mean in life and in your career. And so she actually, about 6 months into that, came to me one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to leave and start my own company. Would you want to come with me?" So I'm like 22 years old, and this partner in the firm just asked me if I wanted to be the first person she, took to go start this new thing. And I will never forget it. So it was the hardest handful of years of my life. It feels like building, a company alongside her. But because I was so fortunate to be that first person there, she taught me everything along the way. And so I think seeing her, she was really building. She had 2 children during that time. I think she's a wonderful mom, but didn't let that stop her from having her eye on the prize in terms of, was still building and growing, and I think dismantling things that needed to be dismantled too. And so that for me was definitely not an if she can do it, I can, because she's incredible, but look at how she's doing it. And is that something that you could do too? And so being able to now build Embarc with her as part of that team is really cool and feels very full circle. It feels kind of wild that I'm the CEO of that company now. It's a little bit of a role reversal in a way, but I think, I think like she really showed me that. And then, at the risk of being so cliche, I think also my husband, it's very unique to build a company with your spouse and we all know in this industry, you work 24/7, 365 days a year. So we went from having normal, healthy boundaries and jobs that weren't with one another all day long into building a company in COVID, which meant we were quite literally together
All the time.
Intellectually, physically, right? Every second of every day. And so I think, he's a builder at heart. He's an entrepreneur. I think he built his first business and sold it when he was like 15 or 16. So having someone that was just sort of no fear, in building businesses, it was like, well, that was a moment of, if he can do it, well, then I can do it. So with Christy, it was more role modeling. I think with him, I was like, no, this means I can definitely do it too.
Well, those sound like 2 amazing mentors. And I know you're about to become a mom as well. So how are you feeling about juggling both now? And after you saw your other mentor and friend do it, how are you gonna do this?
Great question. I will take all the advice from anyone who listens to this who has advice. I welcome it. I think, the reality is a year or two ago, I don't know that this would have been possible. I am young, and my leadership style certainly continues to evolve as I learn and grow. And I think a couple years ago, I was plugging all the holes in the dam with my fingers and toes, right? Because I felt I had to work harder than anybody else to ask them to work as hard as our team does every day. And I think fast forward just a couple years, our team has really grown and really matured. We've stretched and been pulled. Scaling in California cannabis is not easy. I make it harder on them. Like twice this year, I've asked us to open 2 stores on the same day instead of just one, because I'm a monster apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also because I sort of felt like, well, one store in a day doesn't break us. So let's see if, you don't know till you know, right? So let's see.
Use the same resources. Yeah.
Right. So all of that is to say, I think our team has really risen to the occasion in so many ways. And so I don't feel ready to be a parent. That's why I will take all the advice, but
we never do.
Yeah. I feel like at the risk of jinxing it, I feel like we're in a place now where what we really focused on is narrowing, right? In the beginning, you're wide, you're a jack of all trades, you're just keeping the lights on. And we're now in this place where we get to sort of narrow our focus into what is our highest and best, or mostly highest and best use. And so against that backdrop, I feel way more confident that, I can take a couple weeks to have a baby really quick and the sky won't fall.
Having the right team is key. Yeah. I mean, I only took 2 weeks off. I love what I do. For me, it gave me balance to be able to still work, but I still honored my baby and my children as they're getting a little older now. And just being able to, it's not easy to find that balance, but it allows you to still be you and use that intelligent brain, and engage with others and be happier with your baby. So you're not just changing diapers, nursing.
Yeah, I think I will need variety, much like it sounds like you had. And I think, what I've noticed that I'm actually really grateful for is my body is overriding my anxious mind a little bit. When something happens that is stressful and that pre-pregnancy, I would have spiraled for 2 days, figuring out what the perfect solution to that problem was. My body is sort of overriding that now and just sort of saying like, oh, you don't have capacity to spiral for 2 days. So let's make the decision. How are we going to try and solve this? Cool. That next, right? And so that's awesome.
Makes you more efficient.
If that can stick around, that will be, that'll be the silver lining of it all, right? Is you just don't have time to spiral anymore.
No, life is going to be very different, but you're going to be great.
We'll see.
Well, let's talk about what you just accomplished. So you partnered with several high-profile events and festivals, such as Outside Lands, and just recently, the California State Fair, to bring cannabis to the mainstream. How is it helping to move the needle?
It's a great question. And I think each event we do helps me understand how to answer that question a bit differently. I think our team is very, very passionate about live events, because if you think to what we do with retail, building those community coalitions, slowly and painstakingly pushing these processes forward, the goal of all of that is destigmatization or normalization, right? That we have to stop acting. It is our hope that we can see communities embrace cannabis for what it is, stop fearing it for what it isn't, and I think recognize the role it's already playing in our communities, right? Events allow us to just do that on a massive scale. So, you met this weekend, my wristband that keeps popping up is for Outside Lands, right? And at this point, it's really interesting being at that festival 5 or 6 years in, because Outside Lands was really the leader in integrating this in such a massive platform, in such a massive way. It's interesting because so many folks now come. Grasslands is their first stop, and they just expect it, right? They just expect that they're going to be able to buy their cannabis at the festival. They don't have to put it in their sock and sneak it in and all of that, right? Like at this point, it feels pretty normal at Grasslands, which is awesome, right? I mean, I think part of that is because it's San Francisco, and part of that is it's more than a decade or more than half a decade into sales and consumption there. The state fair was very different in a really exciting way. We saw tens of thousands, over 100,000 people over the course of 17 days.
Wow.
And so many of those folks genuinely have no exposure to they've never been into a dispensary. They have never, ordered delivery. They have maybe talked about it a little bit with their friends, and that has felt kind of scandalous, right? And so it was really, really interesting to sort of facilitate access for our brand partners to this entirely new audience. I think that audience has felt a little mythical to me in the retail world. Everybody talks about this, or at least working in LA in 2018 and 2019, everyone talked about that Canna Curious, the Chardonnay mom, the Lululemon mom, this mythical creature that was just going to come in and spend all this money all the time, but really hasn't meaningfully materialized in the same way that those customers that are coming in daily and weekly and keeping your lights on have, right? And so I think being at the fair was really interesting. I mean, multiple times people pulled me aside to say, is it legal for me can I do that? Can I be here? Like, is this okay? And I think we get in cannabis, we get into our echo chamber a bit because our friend, everybody knows what we do, and we talk to other people who do what we do. And we forget that there is an entire world of people out there that really don't know that we exist, even in California. So it was wild to watch them come into this educational exhibit. It was what we did at the fair was sort of a 3-part, really a 4-part component. We had this sort of museum-like educational exhibit that was really designed to tell the history and the legacy and the story of cannabis, but also I think was an important entry point for people who don't have exposure to cannabis yet, right? We're just starting with some education. We're easing our way into it. That educational exhibit ended in kind of a winner's hall that featured all of our gold and silver medalists. So really celebrating cannabis as agriculture, which I think is super important, and also helps to ground that education in what cannabis is and in what it isn't, right? It's more like lettuce and less like the devil's lettuce. And then
I like that saying.
Yeah. And then they had the choice, right? Then they could go on to a sales area and from there to a consumption area, or they could not. They could just have that sort of educational experience. And so I think that was really important, and it was fascinating and awesome to be watching normalization happen in real time, watching people's perspectives change from when they sheepishly or slightly uncomfortably walk through the door to leave with a bag of product they had purchased, 20 or 30 minutes later.
This is such an incredible year, I think, with rescheduling potentially happening and with something like this on such a huge mainstream, to be able to educate people that weren't even expecting it. So I feel like we've just been leaping towards just such like a normalized cannabis industry so quickly over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And it took us so long to get to this point, but I'm so optimistic that every year is just going to explode further and further, which is really exciting.
I think that's a really important perspective. I talk about this a lot. I kind of feel like I'm cheerleading for the industry a little bit every time I do it, but we all get really hard on ourselves and on each other and on sort of the industry that we exist within, because it is hard, right? I mean, no doubt. But I think sometimes we get a little stuck in a trap of that. There's kind of this crab pot mentality sometimes that if someone's doing well, we pull them down instead of try and help them out of the pot, And I think taking a step back and sort of having the perspective you just shared, we went from being effectively, illegal to deemed essential in less than 1 decade. And so while it feels like sometimes we're stagnant or this could be stagnating, or it feels like we haven't gotten everything we want yet. And look, I completely agree. There's a lot that we still as an industry need and want to be set up to be successful. I think when you take a step back and you have that context, like we are in our infancy, appreciating that cannabis has existed far before legalization, right? But
Yeah.
we're in our infancy within the confines of a regulated market. And again, illegal to essential in less than a decade. Like that's incredible.
Really is. Really is. We have to be really proud of all the hard work that we put into this. Some more than others. Some have been doing this for decades and decades, and I'm so grateful for the groundwork that they've put into it. But the more people that have come into this industry and are continuing to fight for it. Um, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that day we became essential in COVID was one of the best days, ever. And then Nicole Elliott became the head of the DCC after that. So she was definitely implemental in making that happen. So we're on the right journey. We're going to get there.
We're going to
Now we
get
just need
there.
legalization.
Yeah, exactly.
So we know that you're about to open another 10 stores. What else is on the horizon for Embarc and yourself?
I think first a couple weeks of break, 17 days of the state
Fair
fair,
enough.
and outside lands a week later. I can't wait to sleep through the night for a couple weeks. And then I think, everybody always asks me, are you going to other states? What's, and I think, to be honest, while so many folks are focused on growth in that way, I'm really focused on growth in the opposite way, which is I think for us, we are going to double down on building sort of the foundations for success. California is the fifth largest economy in the world. I am so bullish on California as a market. I believe in this state and this opportunity so much. And so for me, going from, we built 6 stores in 6 months earlier this year, which was no small feat. And so I think my focus is really on sort of going back to the basics and continuing to invest in the foundation. So it's not a sexy answer. We're not doing anything super sexy, but I think that is, I believe in our business long term. And I think in order to be a long-term business, we have to build and scale in a way that supports continued growth. Consolidation is coming. I don't know what that means for us. I don't have a master plan other than that we need to be ready for whatever that looks like. And being ready for me just means we've got the right team in the right seats doing the right things, and that continues to sort of self-feed and invest in itself. I think, events are also really interesting. It was an honor, and it took many years to get to the point where the California State Fair was comfortable engaging in on-site sales and consumption. And so being the team that they partnered with to bring that to life is, it's something that I'm really proud of and I don't take lightly.
Should be.
I think that there's so much opportunity. That really reminded me of the power of events, the power that they have for our brand partners in telling their stories directly to the masses. I never want to be a gatekeeping retailer. Like, I want our brand partners to develop that loyalty with consumers. And then I want them to us to be a retail partner in continuing that momentum. But I think there's so much power for brands. There's so much power in continuing to change hearts and minds. I was reminded of how many hearts and minds we still have to change. And I think, so I think there will be a really renewed focus there as well. How do we take the fact that such an institution as the 170-year-old California State Fair was willing to take this risk and have it go so well? How do we take that experience and use that to really help open up other communities that are, more conservative or have been reticent to allow commercial cannabis activity? And not just for us, but for everybody. How do we use this as this case study that can help us get California increasingly open so that we have a more prosperous market here? Again, just because I believe so heavily in it.
Education in the community is 100% key. And just a note, opening 10 more stores is very sexy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's also what we'll
and doing all these events. You are doing an incredible job. And obviously, yes, and you being the dispensary choice for these events, you should be so proud of yourself, because that takes a tremendous amount of trust from these organizations to have someone and run something like that. I mean, that is a massive undertaking. So I'm very proud of you, and you should be very proud of yourself. Can you tell us about the first time you consumed cannabis and what that experience was like?
Okay, this one's kind of funny. So I went to a private religious high school, which was funny. I did not grow up in a religious family, but my parents invested very heavily in education because that was something that was very important to both of them. And so my freshman year, private schools, they can kind of do whatever they want, right? So my freshman year, all the popular kids in school started smoking weed, and the school got really upset about it. So they sent this nasty gram of a letter home to all of the parents, and it has like this prayer at the top, praying for our souls, these fresh souls that are experimenting with cannabis. And it's this multi-paragraph, letter about how the devil's lettuce is working its way through the freshman class, and, the sky is falling and disciplinary action is sure to follow. And it closes with another prayer, for our souls. And so my parents sit me down and they're like, hey kid, like, let's talk about this. Are you one of these bad kids smoking the devil's lettuce? Like, what's going on? We got this kind of crazy prayer filled letter, like 3 weeks into freshman year. And I was super honest. I have a great relationship with my parents, and I was super honest. I said, oh no, I haven't. I'm not part of that group of kids. I'm not cool enough to be part of the weed smoking kid club, mom and dad. And I'll never forget, my parents they kind of looked at each other, and, you don't know what they're going to say. Like, are they going to believe me? Or are they going to think I'm lying? And they looked at each other and they were like, here's the thing. This is just not this big of a deal. Like, it shouldn't require prayers for your soul. So if you want to try cannabis, you just let us know, and we will get the weed, and you can sit right here and you can smoke it and you can see what it's all about, right? Like, we just don't want you hiding it or lying or doing all of these secrets. And so I'm going to be honest, it made it feel so uncool. So then I'm like, well, now I don't want to smoke weed. You guys, you ruined it. You completely ruined it. And my dad's like, I'll go to my friend Steve's house. I'll be back in 20 minutes, and I'm like, oh, this is not badass when your dad's going to go to Steve's house and get some weed for you to try. Right. So, so that was actually not the first time I tried it. That was what discouraged me from the first time of trying it, is my parents made it too uncool by being cool parents. But probably a year later, I then tried cannabis the first time. I'm very anxious, so it was not a great first experience, which discouraged continued experiences for a while. Yeah. But then sort of rediscovered cannabis as a way of helping to manage my anxiety a couple years later. So full circle journey, but kind of funny that my parents made that sweet, sweet first trying of weed become so uncool that I didn't do it for another year.
I think that's what's so special about cannabis today, and being able to go to a dispensary and really finding a strain that works for you. Because I am definitely a sativa girl. Like, an indica makes me grumpy, but I would never have known that, 20 years ago.
Great.
Right? Because I didn't know the difference. You just got it from, whoever you got it from. Steve.
My dad just gets it from Steve.
And so, you always felt probably different every time you tried it. And, it was never really consistent. So I also love where this industry is going, and the more research that we can hopefully do on this plant, and understanding how this plant can affect each of us so differently, and benefit us so differently, and affect some negatively. Some, aren't meant for cannabis, that have certain disorders. So it's really important to also understand that as well. Our question of the day is always, how do you elevate daily? So I will ask you this for before you were pregnant, and then also while you're pregnant. And this doesn't have to be cannabis related. This can be yoga, whatever, So give me two ways.
I wish I had the patience for yoga. That would be incredible. I would be so much better for it. I think, pre-pregnancy, cannabis was definitely ritualistic in a positive way. In terms of, I think for Dustin, that's my husband, for Dustin and I, for me, it was very much a mechanism to sort of signify the transition in our day. Because we work together, I am the queen of like waking him up at 3 a.m. with some great idea, like literally shaking him awake to tell him this brilliant idea I had that absolutely could have waited until the morning.
My husband would kill me.
Yeah. No, it's not well received, to be clear. It doesn't go over well in my household either. And so I think, like sharing a joint on the back porch or whatever, I think that's kind of, for me, it signified that moment of connection. Since getting pregnant, it is so insane the way that everything makes me throw up. So I miss that desperately. I look forward to having that experience back again. But I think, kind of as I was saying earlier, for me, I am feeling elevated through this pregnancy experience because of some magic happening inside of my body that is sort of turning the anxiety down. I think it's just self-preservation and allowing me to see see what is actually a problem and sort of elevate to meet that moment, and also not see every nuisance as a problem. So that's been really welcome.
Growing a human inside your body. I mean, that baby's also just going to know what you need too, and is there to regulate you as you're there to help that little being grow. So I love to hear that connection and how he or she is
she's saving me. She's saving my butt right now. Not everything is a crisis, and it is awesome.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This was incredible. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm also just, super responsive via email. So I'm Lauren, Lauren, at goembarc.com.
Thanks for listening to Inhale, Exhale, Elevate. I am Autumn Shelton. This podcast is an extension of Autumn Brands, which was formed by the passion and knowledge of two families that focus on wellness, balance, and a higher self. Our family farm along the coast of Santa Barbara County uses sustainable farming techniques, natural sunlight, and pesticide-free cultivation. If you loved listening to this podcast, which I'm sure you did, please share with your friends and be sure to subscribe and like on social media. You can find our products in dispensaries and delivery services throughout the state of California by going to autumnbrands.com and clicking on the Buy Now button. Follow us on Instagram, autumnbrands_, to learn more. Thank you, Lauren, so much for coming on today.
Thank you.